Okay, final lecture in our second unit. This is metabolic adaptations. So what do we mean when we say metabolic? What do we mean when we say adaptation? So when we say metabolic, we are referring to metabolism or energy. And when we say adaptation, we mean changing or getting used to something. So how our body adapts to aerobic exercise. That's what we mean with this lecture of metabolic adaptation. So what factors affect aerobic training responses? So there are 7 factors. The first one being your initial fitness level. Your next being a training intensity, your training duration, your training frequency, your training volume, your training mode, meaning running, cycling, swimming, and your training progression. So we're using some of the things that you did for your quiz 1 kind of in these concepts here. So what are metabolic adaptations in aerobic exercise? So one is going to happen in the mitochondria. And this is where the work, is taking place. So we're going to have enzymatic activity. We know that these enzymes are sort of these catalysts to speed up reactions. And we are also going to have adaptations in the muscle itself. So talking about fiber and type and motor unit recruitment. So this also gets into our lactate threshold, which in turn is talking about VO2 max, an increase in your VO2 max, and actually a decrease in your resting heart rate. And we'll talk about some of these concepts here as we get through this lecture. So in talking about more metabolic adaptations in aerobic exercise, we're talking about your metabolic machinery. So a trained skeletal muscle fiber is going to have larger and more mitochondria. And this will be important because the mitochondria, remember, this is where our Krebs cycle, our electron transport chain, this is all taking place. So if you have larger and more mitochondria, that means that you are going to adapt and essentially be better at aerobic activity. So this aerobic energy production is taking place in the mitochondria, and this is the basis of our aerobic output. So if you're training this system and if you're becoming better at aerobic exercise, it makes sense that we will have larger and more mitochondria. Also, if you have an increased number of mitochondria, this means you will have enhanced metabolic function. And that's basically what this schematic is showing us. So what we have here is PGC1 alpha, and this plays a role in our mitochondrial biogenesis. So if we have exercise, if we are aerobically fit, if we are using our muscle groups and we are exercising aerobically, our fusion is going to be greater than our fission, which means that we will have improved quantity and quality of mitochondria, which is exactly what we stated up here, but this gives a little bit of a visual. Now, if we have disuse, we are going to have a decrease in PGC1 alpha, where our fusion is going to be less than our fission. So that means that we're going to have degraded protein and fragmented and dysfunctional mitochondria that are not as metabolically equipped to handle the demands of aerobic exercise. So this is just another schematic showing that with exercise training, we have increased biogenesis and fusion. Mitophagy, we will have the addition of healthy mitochondria, the removal of damaged mitochondrial, and in turn, this will enhance our metabolic function and performance. So when we talk about our increased mitochondria, and an increase in enzyme activity, this means that we will have an increase in the capacity of muscle mitochondria to generate ATP aerobically. And this increase in enzyme activity will allow a person to sustain an increase in their percentage of aerobic capacity for a longer effort without the onset of blood lactate accumulation. So again, tying a lot of the concepts that we have discussed in this unit, allowing a person to sustain higher aerobic capacity for a longer effort without the onset of blood lactate acid accumulation. So that's that training right at that lactate threshold and what that is doing metabolically to help our bodies adapt to this aerobic exercise. So muscle fiber size and type from aerobic training. We know that aerobic training is going to elicit metabolic adaptations in each muscle fiber type. The basic fiber type doesn't change that much, but rather all fibers will maximize their already existing aerobic potential. So highly trained aerobic athletes have larger slow twitch type 1 compared to fast twitch type 2. And so these type 2 fibers are going to be recruited during the long aerobic workouts. So their anaerobic capacity does not change with this type of training. So I do say down here, however, with some aerobic training, some type 2 fibers may undergo a transition to exhibit greater aerobic tendencies. And this is something that we're still studying in the field about if muscle fibers can change kind of their enzymatic capabilities and really what that looks like molecularly. So for our muscular adaptations, we can also have an increase in the size of type 1 muscle fibers. We can have an increased number of capillaries. And we'll talk about this in the next unit, but this is important because these capillaries supply your muscle. We also have increased number, size, and oxidative enzyme capacity of the mitochondria. We also have increased myoglobin content. And this is important because this will allow muscles to use oxygen more efficiently. Okay, so we just talked about this lactate threshold from aerobic training. And so the goal of our aerobic training is to lower blood lactate levels and extend your ability to exercise longer. So we drew this out a few modules ago, but remember your factors related to lactic threshold. We talked about these, and also understand that in an untrained individual, we usually see that accumulate at about 50%, whereas a trained individual will be around 75% of VO2 max. So in continuing with our theme of adaptations from aerobic training, we do see a relationship between exercise intensity and oxygen uptake in trained and untrained men. So essentially what you're looking at here, pretty simple. The more that you train, the better aerobically fit you are, the higher VO2 max, and your ability to utilize oxygen more efficiently will be. This graph is looking at heart rate. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this since we haven't talked a whole lot about heart rate. So with aerobic training, you will actually have a decrease in your resting heart rate, and that's a good thing. However, aerobic training does not change your max heart rate. We haven't talked about this in lecture, but an easy way to get your maximum heart rate, other than going on a graded exercise test, which isn't necessarily easy, is 220 minus your age. So just for the general college population, I'm not saying you have to be 20 by any means, but this is the kind of math that I can easily do. So 220 minus age, let's say that you're 20 years old. That means that your maximum heart rate is 200 beats per minute. Whether you are untrained, medium trained, lightly trained, moderately trained, heavily trained, you will never change your max heart rate. You'll change how quickly it takes to reach that maximal status, but your max heart rate does not change with training. Back to some heart rate terminology. If your heart rate is less than 60 beats per minute, and some endurance trained athletes do have, and I'm sure most of you have, a resting heart rate less than 60 beats per minute, that is the technical term called bradycardia. And if your heart rate is over 100 beats per minute, that is called tachycardia. And we can have problems if you're below 60 or above 100, especially if that's not normal for you. So I should say that a normal resting heart rate is between 60 to 100 beats per minute. Now, if I usually have a resting heart rate of around 60 beats per minute, but my resting heart rate ticks up to about 75 or 80 beats per minute, at least for me, I know that I might be coming down with a cold or the flu or something like that. So just because 80 is a very normal resting heart rate for most individuals, that's too high for me. So again, it's really kind of understanding your client, understanding yourself, and how this all plays in. Oh, we didn't analyze the graph. We'll look at this really quickly. So our x-axis is our oxygen uptake, our y-axis is our heart rate. And so essentially when we're talking about your heart rate, your max heart rate not changing, this is exactly what we're talking about right here. Whether you are sedentary, I need a better color. Whether you are sedentary before or after training, look, your max heart rate is always going to be the same. Now, again, how you get to that max heart rate will be different. So the sedentary college students will reach that heart rate at a less oxygen uptake compared to the endurance athletes that are over here at the 5 liters per minute. So in looking at what have we got here? Our total energy calories, our total energy from lipids, and our total energy from carbohydrates. Really, what this graph is showing, and what we're trying to get the point across here, is this idea of our metabolic efficiency. So we have an increased number of mitochondria. We have an increase in capillary supply to our muscles. And we have an increase in fat oxidation. And these are all important concepts when we're talking about adaptations to aerobic exercise or aerobic training. So I think this is one of the last graphs that we'll look at here. If we look on our x-axis and we see training duration in months, so 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. So we're talking about a pretty decent amount of time of training. And then sort of our adaptive and our control responses here. Let's go ahead and look at our aerobic enzymes. We've been saying that they increase, and sure enough, look at the yellow line. Look how much they increase. Now, the unfortunate thing is that whenever you stop training, most of these processes really do fall off. I'm sure you've also experienced this in your own sort of life in training, where you train for a 5K, you run a 5K, and you think, man, I did it. I'm going to be this amazing runner. And then you take 4 months off, 5 months off because life gets busy, right? And you go outside to run at maybe that same intensity you did a few months ago. And guess what? You're not there. Detraining happens so quickly, and it's so frustrating how long it takes to get to a higher level and then how quickly we lose that. So this is just an example of some of the metabolic processes that increase and get better with aerobic training. And then obviously with no training, we see these dip off. So that is our lecture on our metabolic adaptations. Thank you for watching. See you soon.